Hello, my name is Scott Hamlin, and I'm the director of GamesInAFlash.com. I want to talk about how to make a great quiz game. Now, I'm talking about a quiz game where you're just going to have text questions and text answers. So it's a very straightforward, basic quiz game. We're just really talking about something that's a step up from quizzes that you took or paper quizzes that you took in school. And so as a game, it's almost just barely a game. But there is ways to make it compelling, and that's what I want to talk about. Now, if you don't make it compelling, your quizzes may result in expressions like these from the people who use it. That's not good. A yawn is never good. And that's not looking positive either. Here's the thing about it. Now, when you're thinking of making a quiz game yourself, it's often easy to mistakenly think, okay, well, hey, I'm going to make this easy on myself. I'm just going to use the information I have right in front of me. I need to get this done and move on to the next task. Well, there's a problem with that. If you do that and you don't make your quiz compelling and interesting, it could actually have the opposite result of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to educate, your quiz could actually almost uneducate. Here's what I'm talking about. Boring quiz games can possibly result in things like reduced attention span, reduced information retention, ignoring or even rejecting the information, and in extreme cases, it could result in a loss of respect or interest in the subject as a whole. So obviously we want to avoid that. What we want is to have our quizzes result in expressions like these. These people are engaged, they're enjoying themselves, they're having a good time. Games are typically supposed to delight. They're supposed to have fun. And if you can't make it fun, at least you need to try to make it engaging. And so these are some tips on how to do that. Use humor in the questions. This can be challenging. I mean, if you're in a corporate environment particularly, it might be hard to get approval for something fun. However, I would make a strong argument for it. Here's an example. I used to work for Texas Workers' Compensation Commission. Our job was to make materials to keep people from basically killing themselves on the job. Or if it wasn't killing themselves, it was injuring themselves. When people injure themselves, like cut off a limb or carpal tunnel syndrome or anything like that, it reduces productivity, it costs the state money, it hurts the families of the people that do that. And so we needed to get them to actually pay attention to the things we were trying to teach them to avoid hurting themselves on the job. And we found that humor was an important thing to use. If you kept it boring and straight, they would tune you out and they wouldn't pay attention and you wouldn't get the information across. And think about when you were in school, when you were bored, did you remember that material? When you were interested, probably remembered that material more. And if you think back, it's probably the funny teachers or the human ones. And so humor does actually help education. And in fact, what you can also do is you can use humor in the answers. In some cases, you really want them to focus in on an answer. And therefore, the wrong answers are almost obvious. And in that case, there's a great opportunity to go ahead and throw in a little humor. They're throwaway anyway, so have something that's funny in that case. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. All right, here's another thing. Use some general interest questions, especially corporate quizzes. The temptation is to keep it all the corporate words and products and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you do that throughout the entire quiz, it'll get boring. Throw in something that's related. Here's a simple example. I remember we did a quiz question. It was about assembly lines. So we threw in something about the classic I Love Lucy, episode where she was on the assembly line with the candies, and that's human interest. Throw something in like that. It gives them a break from the corporate constancy, if you will. It lets them be human and show that you're human. If you're going to have people play the game more than once, you can make it more compelling by having more questions so that when they play again, they see different questions, and it makes the replayability better. It augments that. That's an important tip. We'll look at examples for that. Okay, this tip is very straightforward. It's almost a general writing tip. Think about when you're reading a book. When paragraphs and sentences are all uniform lengths, the book is subconsciously more boring. People like paragraphs that are short than long, and sentences that are short, sentences that are long. That's just a general writing tip. So in quizzes, it works the same way. If you have all quiz questions looking the same, they're the same length questions and same length answers, it actually bores people subconsciously. So it's good to vary the length of your questions and the length of your answers from question to question. And so we'll look at examples of that. Okay, so here's a quiz example. I took this from my workers' compensation days. This is a quiz question that's designed to help people to avoid repetitive stress, things like carpal tunnel syndrome, for example. And so we have an objective here. We're trying to get people to learn to avoid that. And so the obvious answer is A, stand up and stretch periodically. But the rest of them are find a comfortable position, try to stay in that position all day, which is exactly opposite of what you should do. And then the last one is drink lots of coffee, which doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect it one way or the other. So except for maybe it might help number A because you have to get up and go to the bathroom more often. Okay, so here's the thing. This is fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but if all of the quiz questions were similar to this, it would get dull. And after about 10 questions, they would probably start to just tune out. And you don't want that. The objective here is to avoid injuries or whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so here's a different thing to do. In this case, I've tried to make the question have a little bit more humor. Probably can't get this by a typical corporate boss using the word but hey, it's a little bit of a shock. And by the way, it doesn't have to be humor. It can be something that sort of wakes them up. This is kind of, whoa, I didn't expect to see that. And so that could work too. It doesn't have to be humor. It could just wake them up. And so obviously using stronger language would definitely be bad in a corporate environment, but it could help to do that. Another example here is instead of having the question be funny, since A is the answer and we're really trying to focus in on that, get them to understand that, B and C are sort of throwaway, and so here's a great example of, hey, we can say something funny. And in assembly lines, for instance, obviously getting drunk is a good way to lose a limb, and so if you're going to be talking about it later, you might be able to say, hey, I know we made a joke about that, but by the way, you should watch out for that. So it could be, you could use a joke as an entry point into a follow-up, but nevertheless, having some fun with either the questions or the answers is a great way to make a quiz game more compelling. And so let's move on to another example. As I mentioned before, if you can have a lot of quiz questions, and so if you're going to have them play again, let's say instead of having only 10 quiz questions, each of these little green dots represents a quiz question. If you're going to have only 10, you could still have a pool or a larger number of overall questions, and then every time they play, what can happen is, here's in the first one it used question 1 and question 5, question 7, and so forth, and if they play it again, it might use question 2 and question 6 and question 9, so it's very different. And then maybe if they play a third time, they could also get completely different questions, and so that increases the replay value of it. It could still, a lot of the questions could be really the same subject matter, just reworded, and so it reinforces. And that's a very common learning technique, is to try to get the same information across, just reworded or coming at it from a different angle. Lastly, here's an example of different questions with different lengths. Really, they're asking the same thing, but look at the short one. How do you avoid repetitive stress injuries? Well, in the context of the quiz, it might be obvious that it's an assembly line, so keeping the quiz questions shorter is a good thing because they can get through the content faster. So a lot of times, a good thing to do is just edit yourself. Is it really necessary to have all of that reading? And the more that they have to read, the more it could get boring for them. On the other hand, if your questions are always as short as the first one, then from a visual perspective, it gets boring. So it's good to kind of break things up. Have some questions that are short, have some that are longer, have some answers that are short, 1 word, and then some that are 3 or 4 or 5 words. For answers, you got to remember, they're going to read 3 or 4 of them. If they're all really long, if they're all like mini books or paragraphs, well, that's going to take them longer to do it, and it's also going to bore them. In quiz questions, editing is a good thing. Okay, so I want to just go back over these, just review. So the first thing you want to do is try to use more humor in the questions, or try to use more humor in the answers. Another thing you can do is have some general interest questions. You can also try to use more questions and vary them so that if they play again, they'll get different questions. And lastly, you want to vary the quiz question lengths and avoid overly long quiz questions. Now you can employ all these techniques with our Quizmaker game at Games in a Flash. We normally license that game for $150, but I want to make this available to you so that you can employ these techniques. And so I'm going to go ahead and offer this promo code. This is QuizWriter Pro. It is case sensitive. If you use that, you can knock $53 off, and we can license that game to you for $97. Now you can When you license a game from Games in a Flash, you can use it any number of times. You can go to this URL, or if you look down below this video here on YouTube, you can click on that link and it will take you to the link on our site. And if you use that promo code, you can get this game for $97. Check out some more videos at Arcade Builder or at Games in the Flash on how to leverage the Quizmaker game to make great quizzes.